The small, darkened hospital room was silent except for the muffled wails of the newborn. The infant's cries had a strange resonance, so fragile and yet commanding, as if to proclaim his arrival to the world in spite of the hopeless situation. The boy's parents, Martin and Claudia, stood petrified by the bedside, the expressions on their faces a mix of shock and dread. The words of the doctor still echoed in their minds: "Your son has a rare condition. His appearance may not align with societal norms, but he is otherwise healthy." The words societal norms hung in the air like a bitter accusation. Martin's shoulders stiffened as he looked at the tiny figure swaddled in a hospital blanket. Claudia's trembling hands clutched her husband's arm, tears streaming down her face. "We can't do this," Martin finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Hell ruin everything." Claudia's sobs grew louder. Deep down, she knew this was true. For years, they had built an image of the perfect family, a model couple with perfect children to go along with their picture-perfect suburban life. This child, with his unusual features and unsure future, did not fit in that picture. And so, 3 days later, in the veil of night, Martin and Claudia left the hospital without their son, with a sad story to be concocted for friends and relatives. 25 years later, the golden hues of the evening sun bathed the manicured lawns of the Simmons estate. Martin was a successful businessman now, and Claudia, a socialite known for her philanthropic works, had built an empire of respectability. Their picture adorned magazine covers, showing their 2 perfect children, Madison and Lucas. But their weaknesses were veiled to the rest of the world. Under their glossy smiles, guilt had been festering like an unhealed wound. Claudia woke in the dead of night often, haunted by the dreams of a child's crying voice. Martin's temper was much shorter now, his guilt breaking through as bursts of anger, with his family around him, walking on eggshells. Meanwhile, in a bustling city far from the Simmons' idyllic suburb, Nathan worked tirelessly at his clinic. Known simply as Dr. Nathan to his patients, he had built a reputation for his kindness and surgical prowess. Despite his humble beginnings in an overcrowded orphanage, Nathan had risen above his circumstances. His life was a testament to resilience and the power of self-belief. "Dr. Nathan," his assistant called, breaking his concentration. "There's a patient here who specifically requested you." "They're insistent." Nathan sighed. "I'll be right there." As he entered the consultation room, his heart skipped a beat. Sitting before him were Martin and Claudia Simmons. The years had aged them, but there was no mistaking their faces. The faces he had seen only in faded photographs tucked away in a dusty orphanage file. "Dr. Nathan," Martin began, his voice strained. We've heard great things about you. My wife needs surgery, and we've been told you're the best." Nathan's gaze flickered between them, his composure unshaken. "I see. Let's discuss the procedure in detail," he said calmly, concealing the storm of emotions raging within him. Later that night, Nathan sat alone in his office, staring at the Simmons file. His mind was replete with questions. Why now? What cosmic twist of fate had brought them into his life after all these years? Determined to confront his past, Nathan devised a plan. He would perform the surgery, but on his terms. It was time for Martin and Claudia to face the truth they had buried for so long. It was now time for the surgery, and the hospital was tense. Claudia lay on the operating table, her hands tied on Martin's as she struggled to mask her fear. Nathan stood over her, professional yet cold. "Before we begin," Nathan said, his voice steady, "I'd like to share something personal. A story about a child abandoned by his parents, left to fend for himself in a world that deemed him unworthy." Martin's face turned ashen. Claudia's eyes widened in horror. They knew. "But that child grew up," Nathan continued. "He discovered that his worth wasn't defined by those who rejected him. Instead, it was forged by his resilience and the kindness of strangers who believed in him." Silence enveloped the room as Nathan's words hung in the air. Then, with a faint smile, he added, "Let's begin the surgery, shall we?" As the anesthesia took hold, Claudia's last conscious thought was of a newborn's cry, a sound that had haunted her for 25 years. And in that moment she realized that the past, no matter how deeply buried, always had a way of resurfacing. Over the days that followed Claudia's surgery, Nathan's confrontation, so well planned, started to break down the Simmons' perfect world. Martin and Claudia returned to their large estate, but the veneer of perfection they had built for decades began to crack under the weight of unearthed memories. Claudia sat in her opulent living room, staring at the gilded photo frames lining the mantel. Each picture depicted a perfect family moment: vacations on white sandy beaches, elegant galas, Christmas mornings by a towering tree. But now, all she could see were the absences, the missing piece of the puzzle she had tried so hard to ignore. "Martin," she called, the shake in her voice betraying her. Martin appeared in the doorway, his brow furrowed. "What is it now, Claudia?" she faltered, clutching a framed photo of their two children, Madison and Lucas, as toddlers. "Do you think he knows? Do you think he's doing this to punish us?" Martin's jaw tightened. "Don't be ridiculous. He's a doctor. He has a professional reputation to uphold. Whatever you're imagining is just guilt playing tricks on you." Claudia's eyes welled up with tears. "But what if he does know? What if he hates us?" Martin let out a heavy sigh and poured himself a drink from the crystal decanter on the bar cart. "Even if he does, what can he do about it? The past is the past. We can't change it." While the Simmons home was filled with unease, Nathan's clinic thrived. He poured himself into his work, treating each patient with the same compassion and precision that had earned him a stellar reputation. But late at night, when the bustling clinic grew quiet, Nathan's thoughts drifted back to his biological parents. What now? He would ask himself many times, looking out the window of his modest apartment into the city lights. For years, he had been thinking about this moment, of confronting them, making them understand the pain they had caused. Now that the time was here, he found himself confused. One evening, as Nathan was reviewing patient charts, his assistant, Emily, entered his office. "Dr. Nathan," she began hesitantly, I overheard something today. The Simmons, your patients, they've been asking a lot of questions about you." Nathan's pen paused mid-signature. "What kind of questions?" Emily fidgeted with the hem of her scrubs. "Personal ones. Where you're from, your background, things like that. It's unusual. Most patients don't pry like that." Nathan leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, Emily. I'll handle it." The following week, Nathan received an invitation he had not expected. A handwritten card, embossed with the Simmons family crest, arrived at his clinic. "Dr. Nathan, we would be delighted if you were able to join us for dinner at our home this Friday evening. Your extraordinary care and kindness have touched our family so deeply. Allow us to express our gratitude in return. Yours sincerely, Martin and Claudia Simmons." Nathan stared at the invitation for a long moment before tucking it into his pocket. The gesture was unexpected, but it aligned with his plan. If the Simmons wanted to open their home to him, he would accept, but on his terms. Friday evening arrived, finding Nathan standing before the Simmons' grand estate. The house was a real masterpiece of modern architecture, with its glass walls reflecting the warm glow of the setting sun. At the door, he was greeted by a butler who escorted him through to the dining room. Martin, Claudia, Madison, and Lucas were waiting. Nathan shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for the invitation." Claudia gave a nervous smile. "Please sit down. Dinner will be served shortly." The dinner started with small talk. Martin and Claudia asked Nathan about his job, his success, and his life in the city. Nathan answered them in measured responses, always maneuvering the conversation away from anything too personal. It wasn't until dessert was served that Nathan decided to change the topic. "It's a nice house," he said very calmly. "I can see it holds many memories." Claudia's fork knocked against her plate. "Yes, it does," she said in barely a whisper. Nathan leaned back in his chair, studying their reactions. "I've always wondered what it would be like to grow up in a home like this. You see, I spent most of my childhood in an orphanage." The room fell silent. Madison and Lucas exchanged puzzled glances, while Martin and Claudia froze in their seats. I often wondered about my parents, Nathan went on, staring intently at Martin and Claudia. What they were like, why they left me. But I have since come to realize that sometimes questions remain unanswered. Or probably, the answers are not what we would want to hear. Tears welled up in Claudia's eyes as Martin's face hardened, though his hands still shook as he held his glass. Dr. Nathan, Lucas interrupted, his voice hushed in curiosity. Are you telling me that you found your biological parents? Nathan's lips arched into a faint smile. Well, sort of. Life has this funny way of bringing people together, doesn't it? Before anybody could respond, Nathan was on his feet. Thank you for a lovely evening. I really should go now. Claudia stood. Wait. Please. We do need to talk. Nathan stopped, his hand on the back of his chair. Perhaps another time, he said smoothly. Good night. As he departed the estate, Nathan felt a surge of satisfaction. The seeds of doubt and guilt he had planted were beginning to take root. But this was only the beginning. The Simmons would soon learn that the past could not be so easily erased. In the days since Nathan had been there, the Simmons estate was eerily quiet. Claudia spent hour after hour pacing its halls, her mind racing with Nathan's veiled words. Martin, the eternal pragmatist, threw himself into work as though nothing had changed. Still, the tension was inescapable, like the hint of a storm beyond the horizon. One evening, Martin sat in his study, going over quarterly reports. Claudia entered, clutching a crumpled envelope. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. Martin, we need to talk, she said, her voice trembling. Martin sighed and removed his reading glasses. What is it now, Claudia? She laid the envelope on his desk. This came in the mail today. It's from the orphanage. Martin's brow furrowed as he opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The letter was short but damning. It confirmed their son, the one they had given up 25 years ago, had grown up to be no other than Dr. Nathan. How did they find us? Martin muttered, his hands shaking. It doesn't matter how, Claudia said, her voice rising. What matters is that he knows. And he's playing with us, Martin. He's punishing us. Martin slammed his fist onto the desk. Enough. We made our decision years ago. We can't take it back now. We just need to. He stopped, unable to find the words. We need to make this right, Claudia said firmly. We need to talk to him. Martin glared at her. And say what? That we're sorry? That we regret abandoning him? Do you really think he'll forgive us? Claudia's silence was answer enough. Meanwhile, Nathan's life went on as usual, his mind continually wandering back to the Simmons. He had spent years envisioning this moment, preparing himself for the confrontation. Now that it was finally happening, he felt an unexpected weight. Despite everything, a part of him still yearned for their acceptance, their acknowledgement of the pain they had caused. One afternoon, as he was finishing a consultation, Emily entered his office. Dr. Nathan, there is someone here to see you. They didn't have an appointment, but they said it's urgent. Nathan's brow furrowed. Who is it? Claudia Simmons, Emily replied hesitantly. Nathan's heart skipped a beat. Send her in. Claudia entered the office and looked smaller and more fragile compared to how Nathan remembered her. She clutched tightly onto her handbag, her knuckles white. Dr. Nathan, she started, her voice barely a whisper. Thank you for seeing me. Nathan motioned to a chair. Please sit. She sat down, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for the right words. Finally she spoke. I know who you are, she said, her voice cracking. And I know you know who we are. I just wanted to say that I'm sorry. For everything. Nathan didn't bat an eyelid. Sorry for abandoning me? Or sorry that I've turned up in your life again? Claudia winced at his words, and tears began to course down her cheeks. Both. We were young, scared, and selfish. There's no excuse for what we did, But I need you to know not one day has passed that I don't regret it. Nathan leaned back in his chair, studying her. Regret doesn't erase the past. It doesn't change the fact that I grew up wondering why I wasn't good enough for my own parents. Claudia sobbed openly now. I know. And I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I had to try. For a long moment, Nathan said nothing. Then he stood and walked to the window, staring out at the city skyline. I've spent years trying to understand why you left me, he said quietly. And I've come to realize that the answer doesn't really matter. What matters is what I do now. Whether I let your actions define me or whether I rise above them. Claudia's sobs slowly died down as she listened to him. Nathan, please, if there is anything we can do to make this right, anything at all, just tell me. Nathan turned to her then, his face unreadable. You can start by being honest with your family. Tell them the truth. All of it. Claudia's eyes widened. But what if they hate us for it? Then you'll know how it feels, he returned calmly. That evening, Claudia and Martin assembled their children in the living room. Madison and Lucas sat on the plush sofa, looking curious and confused. What's this about? Lucas asked. Martin cleared his throat, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. There's something we need to tell you. Something we should have told you a long time ago. Claudia took a deep breath and began to speak, relating the story of their first child. Madison and Lucas listened to her in stunned silence, their faces changing from shock to disbelieving to anger. So, let me get this straight, Madison said, her voice trembling. You abandoned your own child because he wasn't perfect enough for you? It wasn't like that, Claudia pleaded. We were young and scared. We made a terrible mistake. A mistake? Lucas repeated, his voice full of incredulity. A mistake is forgetting someone's birthday, not leaving your own child to grow up alone. Madison stood, her hands balled into fists. You're disgusting. Both of you. I can't even look at you right now. With that, she stormed out of the room. Lucas followed, leaving Martin and Claudia alone with their guilt. Nathan watched the scene unfold from his car, parked just outside the estate. He had expected this reaction, but seeing it play out still stirred a complex mix of emotions within him. Part of him felt vindicated, but another part, the part that had always longed for a family, felt an ache which no amount of justice could erase. It's a start, he muttered to himself, starting the engine. The road ahead was long, but Nathan felt like for the very first time he was facing the right direction. The revelation brought a thick cloud of tense silence over the Simmons household. Days ran into weeks, and though Martin and Claudia made several attempts to talk to Madison and Lucas, they were coldly rebuffed. This family, once seemingly perfect, was now fractured, and the weight of their past seemed to loom heavy upon them. Nathan, on the other hand, was in that weird state of emotional limbo. The confrontation had brought some sort of closure, but it hadn't fully eased the ache of abandonment. His life went on with the same rhythm, patients to see, surgeries to perform, but something inside him had shifted. One evening, as Nathan was closing his clinic, he found Madison waiting by the front desk. Her eyes were puffy, her expression uncertain. Dr. Nathan, she began, her voice soft. I am sorry for showing up unannounced. I just didn't know where else to go. Nathan offered her a seat in his office, his curiosity piqued. Once they were seated, Madison hesitated, twisting her hands nervously. My parents told us everything, she said finally. About you, about what they did. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For what it's worth, I think what they did was horrible. Nathan's expression softened. Thank you, Madison. That means more than you know. She bit her lip, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I don't know how to fix this. My parents are a mess, my brother's furious, and I feel like everything I believed about our family was a lie. Nathan leaned forward, his tone even and composed. Families are messy, Madison. The truth stings, but at times it may be the thing that will free you. Your parents did an awful thing, but admitting to it is the first step in setting things right. Madison nodded slowly, digesting what he had said. Do you think there's a chance you could forgive them? Nathan sighed. Forgiveness isn't easy, and it doesn't happen overnight. But I'm willing to try, as long as they're willing to make the effort too. Encouraged by her conversation with Nathan, Madison returned home with a renewed sense of purpose. She convinced her brother to join her in sitting down with their parents to have an honest discussion about their feelings. The conversation was raw and emotional, with tears shed and voices raised, but it marked the beginning of a new chapter for the Simmons family. Martin and Claudia were, for the first time, candidly talking about their fears and regrets. Neither tried to justify their actions as they recognized the hurt they had brought not only to Nathan but also to their other children with such a significant secret kept hidden. Madison and Lucas, although still hurt, began to see their parents in a human perspective, flawed but able to grow. A week later, Nathan received another invitation from the Simmons, this time for a family gathering. After much deliberation, he decided to go. He came onto the estate, and there were Madison and Lucas, waiting at the door to greet him. Their warmth and sincerity set the tone for the evening. The dining room, now, no longer felt like this place where tension and uneasy feelings dominated. The family discussions were freer, their contact with each other more valid. Martin and Claudia certainly were working at patching things up, and though slow, it would show. Halfway into dinner, Martin stood and raised his glass. Nathan, he started, his voice trembling with emotion, I know I cannot change the past, but I wanted you to know how very, very sorry I am. You deserve better, and I failed you as a father. From this day forward, I promise to do everything in my power to make it right. Claudia followed suit, her eyes brimming with tears. Nathan, you are an amazing man, and that is a tribute to your strength and resilience. We don't deserve your forgiveness, but we're so grateful that you've given us a chance to try. Nathan's chest tightened with emotion. He raised his own glass, his voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. Thank you. Forgiveness isn't a gift I'm ready to give just yet, but tonight is a step in the right direction. Let's keep taking those steps together. The room erupted in applause, not out of celebration, but out of relief and hope. For the first time in decades, the Simmons family felt like they were on the path to healing. Time went by, and Nathan's relationship with the Simmons drew closer. Their situation might never be normal, but they stood on a foundation of sincerity in their words and their drive to move on. His trips to the estate now turned regular. He even found himself acting as a mentor for Lucas, who had recently grown an interest in medicine. Through Nathan's perseverance, Madison began to volunteer at the local orphanage, determined to make a difference in children's lives who, like Nathan, had been abandoned. It brought her a sense of purpose and fulfillment she never had before. Martin and Claudia, on their part, plunged into supporting projects that catered to the needs of less privileged children. Their philanthropy was now less about appearances and more about heartfelt compassion, a change very much noticed and appreciated by their community. One evening, as Nathan prepared to leave the estate after a family dinner, Claudia stopped him at the door. Nathan, she said, her voice soft, I know we still have a long way to go, but I want you to know how proud I am of you. You've become everything I could have ever hoped for in a son. Nathan smiled, his heart swelling with a mix of emotions. Thank you, Claudia. That means more than you know. As he drove away, Nathan felt a peace he hadn't known in years. The road to reconciliation wasn't easy, but it was one he was willing to travel. It wasn't about erasing the past, but building a future where love and forgiveness could thrive. And that, Nathan realized, was a journey worth taking. The Simmons family continued to grow and evolve, learning from their mistakes, striving to be better for one another. Their story would be an example to others in their community of the power of accountability and the possibility of redemption. For Nathan, it brought not only closure but also the family he always dreamed of, imperfect, but finally, truly his.